Here is a country of great contrast.
Great civilization of antiquity.
A foreign country of temple.
All right, we're back with the Casa de Cavazos. I'm Justin in Chicago. That's Ada in Harlingen, Texas. And that's Nathan in San Antonio, Texas. Providing that Tejano connection to reality. I always find it interesting when you talk to people who are outside of Texas. You tell them you're from South Texas. They won't consider the valley. They'll be like, oh, you're from Houston? A 5-hour drive away, 6-hour drive away.
Yeah. Texas is massive, so it's hard to pin down where people live sometimes.
Living in the Midwest is very different because it's like less than an hour and you're in another state. The distance that it would take you to drive from Harlingen to San Antonio, you can skip a state or two driving to some places in the Midwest. So when I tell someone like, oh, it's only a 5-hour drive, they say, only 5 hours? What do you mean only?
Have you ever been at the Louisiana-Texas border? Because there's a sign when you enter Texas that tells you the distance to El Paso, and I think it's like 800 some miles. It's a really crazy sign. Like, wow.
Yeah, I've done the drive from Harlingen to El Paso. It's like 12 hours. And that's when you're in West Texas where there's a whole bunch of nothing. And the speed limit's like 80, 90 miles an hour, and it still takes that long.
Do you guys ever have to like name a bunch of other cities except where you live? When people ask, like, well, where are you from originally?
Yeah, South Padre is usually the one that helps people realize where we're at.
I feel like Brownsville helps now, too, if they know where SpaceX is.
I haven't tried that yet, but usually it's you're South. Yeah, I know where South Padre is.
I'll try to say Harlingen. And even then, people are like, Arlington? It's like, no! I said it in a very specific way.
One of my professors who lives in Poland now, I think maybe he is Polish, but he said that he knew Brownsville because his dad was stationed there at some point. I guess there was a military base there at some point, or a temporary base there. So it's a small world sometimes.
You could also say like, oh, like we're around McAllen, the fattest city in the U.S.
Is it the fattest city in the U.S.?
It's up there. It's like in the top 3, I think.
Yeah.
I concur. I've seen it personally.
Anecdotal evidence has confirmed it.
I mean, there are so many factors. Like, it's already getting back to the 80s in the temperature here. Like, how can you even exercise outside most of the time? It's so freaking hot and humid.
80s are okay.
Oh man, I thought y'all were talking about 1980.
No, I ran on Wednesday. It was in the 70s, but it was humid. I was like dying. It was so bad. In January.
Nope, McAllen is number 1. Fattest city in the U.S. as of a 2025 rating.
We do have a lot of good food, so that's part of it too. You know how they make those tacos at Stripes that are super good?
Yeah, for like $1. Well, it's like $2 now because of inflation.
I mean, they're homemade tortillas. It's just so good.
Yeah, you go eat at La Playa where you have like the fried avocado that's stuffed with like cheese and steak.
It's so good. That's why I try to avoid it as much as possible. I did have something good happen to me this week, though. I was worried about my kid wanting to work at Target for her career. And this week she told me, well, I need to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. I said, I thought you were going to work at Target. She said, well, I got to make money.
What the hell?
I'm going to work at Target when I'm younger. I've got to get a career for after Target. So I feel better now.
How old is she?
She's 11. She's been 11 for about a month. I feel like these kids are a lot more mature just because they're exposed to a lot of things online. Yeah, I don't think I was thinking about my career at that age at all.
What were you thinking about?
Making art, like drawing, basically.
Is that when you were making like the paper clothes?
Yeah. Yep. I was making paper uniforms, football uniforms.
What was the story with this? Who wore these?
Everybody did.
Willingly?
Yep.
How much paper did you have to use to make like a single garment?
I don't know. I think I used newspaper.
It was like regular paper as well, like from school.
Yeah.
I wonder how like dad must have felt that you got all these school supplies and you were using all the paper.
They didn't care. Like, outside doing like Olympics. I had so many paper gold medals.
Yeah, we pretty much did whatever we wanted, but it wasn't bad. Like, there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of playing outside and making things up.
You weren't thinking about how you were going to contribute to the economy.
No.
So we got some more NBA news. The All-Star Reserves have been announced since we last spoke. The All-Star Reserves are chosen by all 30 head coaches in the league. The only rule is that you can't vote for a player that is on your team that you are coaching. So that's 2 guards, 3 front court players, and 2 wild card players for each side. In the Eastern Conference, we had Darius Garland from Cleveland, Cade Cunningham from Detroit, Damian Lillard with Milwaukee, Tyler Hero in Miami, Jaylen Brown in Boston, Evan Mobley from Cleveland, and Pascal Siakam from Indiana. And in the West, Anthony Edwards with the Minnesota Timberwolves, James Harden with LA Clippers, Victor Wembanyama with the Spurs, Jalen Williams with OKC, Alperen Şengün with the Houston Rockets, Jaren Jackson Jr. from the Grizzlies, and Anthony Davis from the Los Angeles Lakers. Discuss. What do you think?
I kind of feel like these reserves were kind of picked like how, you're disqualified from MVP if your team's like doing pretty badly. I feel like these reserves are based on the record. So Cleveland has 3 All-Stars then from what you said? Because they already had Mitchell, right, as a starter?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think I saw one from Memphis, from Houston. Houston only had one, though? That was their only All-Star player?
That was their only one. I feel like they were just trying to give a nod to someone from Houston because their record was good.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I feel like it's like the whole MVP thing. Like you're disqualified if your team wasn't doing well, which is very weird, though, because Steph Curry, his team's not doing very well, and he's in over De'Aaron Fox.
And Sabonis.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if Sabonis got consideration, Fox definitely should have been there. I mean, he's very consistent. He's having one of his best years as well.
I've heard really good things about Sengun for a while.
Şengün.
Is it Sengun?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, Bill Simmons has been pretty high on him for a while. Like, he's a really good player.
So I haven't really seen him, but maybe he does deserve the spot.
He is Turkish.
Oh, cool.
As far as the East, I don't really feel LaMelo should have been on there. Trey Young's also another snub, but
Yeah.
also 2 teams don't have great records. But LaMelo's is especially egregious because I feel like his stats are... I mean, he's like one of the best players in the league if you look at his stats.
Yeah, but
I mean,
they're...
the rest of the squad... I mean, it's very hard to elevate a squad when you're just like a guard, especially a point guard.
Well, the Hornets are next to last in the East. Like they've only won 12 games this year.
Yeah, that's definitely taken into consideration when they make these decisions.
Yeah, but if you want to get the fans to care about this game, I mean, LaMelo's a really exciting player to watch. I feel like you should have considered him.
Yeah, I feel like LeBron still made All-Star teams even when he was on some of those mediocre Lakers squads.
Yeah, I think he's just getting this could be his last year kind of votes at this point. I mean, yeah, he's still good, but definitely not a good defender anymore.
Like Kobe with some of those later All-Star nods that he got.
Yeah, like the years after the Achilles injury, I mean, his shooting percentage was so low. That's why I'm kind of surprised that for the West that Harden got in because Norman Powell's having a way better year. Every time I've checked Harden, he still hasn't come over 40% shooting for the season. Norman Powell pretty much playing the way he has is why they're where they are in the standings, allowing Kawhi to really take his time to come back. Yeah, he's still 39.8% from the floor. All-Star.
Wemby is a player on the team with the worst record of anyone who was selected to the All-Star team.
On both sides?
I think so. Yeah, 21 and 24.
I mean, Wemby's a generational talent, so he gets that priority, essentially.
Yeah, that team is super inconsistent. They hang with some of the best teams in the league, and then the next day they'll get blown out by a mediocre team.
Yeah, they just blew out Milwaukee last night.
Yeah, after getting blown out by Indiana in that second of those Paris games.
That's why they're trying to make moves, right? Possibly getting De'Aaron Fox.
Yeah, well, they got to do something. You already know in the current NBA, these players are not going to stick around if they can't win. So they got to get somebody in there.
Do you feel like Wemby's that type, though?
Yeah, I don't know if the international players are like that. Like most of the really good international players have stuck with their teams, right? Jokic, Giannis, Embiid. Like, you don't see the international players demanding trades or trying to get to other teams.
I mean, but Jokic and like Giannis, they've already won titles. I mean, it's kind of easier for them to stay.
But Jokic just barely won a title a few years ago. Like, he's had contract extensions and renewals before then.
But they've also had really good teams. They were close a couple of times. I mean, I don't think he ever felt like we're not there.
Yeah.
And that's usually when they want to leave. So like the Spurs, let's say they don't make the playoffs this year, don't make it again. Like you go 4 or 5 seasons in, you haven't even made the playoffs. That's when they start to be like, oh, well, maybe I should move on.
Yeah. Can you name any international players that have demanded a trade?
Demanded?
In the past couple of years?
Man. I can't say that I have, but I mean, times are changing.
Like if an international player is really good on their team, they usually stay. if they end up getting moved around, they don't usually have a demand. They end up getting just moved around because there's some other issue with their game.
Well, then again, now that I think about it, it's kind of like, I mean, this is maybe the first generation where we've actually had these international players be like legit number one superstars.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we won't see it yet.
Do we have MVP numbers at this point, this early in the season?
I'm pretty sure if we looked at it, Jokic is probably running away with it so far. Shea should be right there with him too.
Yeah, there's 2 international players, and I'm sure Giannis is in the conversation too. There's 3 international players.
I think it's probably the U.S. culture. Like, I feel like, I don't know what's going on with this culture that we have in the United States, but I think there's a lot more selfishness, and I don't really see that in the other countries. So I think some of these other players probably come from a different type of culture where they're not necessarily just thinking about, oh, I've got to win. Like, maybe they're thinking they have to win, but maybe they just have to get better as a player. Maybe they have to help their teammates get better. And then you have Jokic, who doesn't care. Like, he just does his job. He wants to do his job well, but he doesn't really care that much as far as playing extra games, and he just wants to get back home.
He wants to hang out with his brothers and his horses.
Yes.
Like Giannis, like, really cares about his family. He has that perspective of growing up poor, of being an immigrant family, where his parents went from Nigeria to Greece, and he worked really hard to get to where he was, but he has a perspective of not being some rich kid with former NBA parents who put him through all the basketball camps and AAU and paid all of this money to get coachings with former players and all that. And I think that's where a lot of the American players are nowadays.
I mean, I'm not sure that like some of the players grew up privileged. Like, I don't think people like Kawhi grew up privileged, but there is something about our culture here in this country where I think we're very much selfish and self-centered, and I think that plays a role.
Well, I'm really interested to see how Cade Cunningham does, because I think he's still flying under the radar because he plays for Detroit, but they've made a massive improvement this year, because I mean, we all saw the record they had last year, and he was putting up stats, so of course people are like, oh, they're empty stats, but he's putting up the same or better stats, and now they're winning. So I want to see if he gets a little bit more respect once people see him at the All-Star game, or maybe follow him a little bit more.
I feel like some of these guys are starting to get their dues. Cade, even like Tyler Hero, being the representative for the Heat.
Yeah, he's always been in the trade rumors, and now he's their all-star. It's crazy. So I was like, you got to give him up to get a better player for Jimmy Butler. And it turns out maybe he was the player they needed the whole time, but it's kind of hard to play constantly in the rumors.
What have you all heard about Jimmy Butler?
I'm hearing that the Warriors are the main team that has interest. And Kerr says it doesn't look like they would stand pat with the current record and status of the roster.
Yeah,
I think it would be a good fit. It's just, I don't know, like, who do you give up there? I mean, I kind of feel like maybe you should give up Draymond in this trade. I feel like, I mean, I don't know. Would he fit with Miami? Do you think he'd buy into that culture?
I think he would. I mean, he's all effort all the time. I just don't know how that helps their shot creation unless you're kind of treating Draymond as kind of this point center, or it's like a point forward.
I've heard they need to give up Wiggins, and that the Warriors are the only team desperate enough to get Jimmy Butler.
But if you give up Wiggins, is it a straight up trade? Because I kind of feel like Miami would ask for Kuminga as well.
Maybe they should. Maybe they should give up Kuminga and Wiggins. I mean, Jimmy Butler, he doesn't have a lot of years left, and he's probably going to demand a lot of money, but he can get you some playoff wins for sure.
Yeah, and the Warriors desperately need some shot creation outside of Steph. Like, they got some guys who can knock down shots, but they can't make their own if they're not Steph.
I've also read that it's at a point where Steph is getting like double teamed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, they know like who they're going to at the end of a game, and it makes it very difficult. Like, you don't have any shot creators. I mean, you put Butler in there, that guy can obviously post up, drive, get a foul. Curry's, he's still small. That's always been the thing with him.
Yeah.
They're going to body him up, and he struggles a little bit. I mean, not too much, obviously. He's still shooting over 40% from three, but you see where he's had these bad games now where basically, I mean, shooting nothing but threes because they're just keen on him from getting in the paint and distributing.
Yeah. And that would also kind of depend, too, if Jimmy can stay healthy for the rest of the season and for like an entire playoff series, because it's not going to be one of those things like Miami in the East for a couple of years was kind of coasting until getting into the playoffs and then wreaking havoc. The Warriors have to actually play good games to get out of the play-in.
Yeah, he's going to have to come in if they do this trade, and they're going to have to go on a run pretty much right away. But definitely a good fit. I mean, if they can get him, I think that'd be the ideal place.
Yeah, without giving up too much.
Yeah, some of the other teams that have been mentioned, I mean, I think they're going to have to give up way too much. And At that point, it's basically championship or bust.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the Warriors are in that position. I think maybe they can try to get him this year and then hopefully do something next year if it doesn't work out.
If they can get Jimmy Butler, I think the Warriors become a pretty solid buyout target too for some of those vets that are interested in possibly joining that kind of team.
Which vets are looking to get bought out? Do you know?
Ooh. I said that without having a list in mind. I was like, I hope he doesn't ask me.
To be determined.
I'm just Googling NBA buyout candidates.
But if they have both Steph and Jimmy Butler, they're going to have a two-headed snake. And so that'll take some wear and tear off both Steph and Jimmy. Because right now, Steph is getting like full court pressed and double teamed. And he's what, like 36 years old?
Yeah. Are there any, when you're doing this search, are there any good 3-point spot up shooters that would maybe be candidates?
Malcolm Brogdon could be a buyout guy.
Is he still good? Okay.
I mean,
Is it Brogdon or Brogdon?
Brogdon? Brogdon? We don't know how to pronounce anything on this pod.
We're learning how to pronounce words. That's actually the goal of the pod.
Sengun, Brogdon, Randipal. I feel like it's pretty early. Most of the news is coming out is about trade candidates than it is about buyout.
I've heard that the Bucks, I mean, I don't think it'd be a buyout, but possibly moving on from Chris Middleton. So I wonder if that could be somebody they could try to get as well.
Didn't his name get thrown around with the Miami Butler trade?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, maybe it's another name they could look at to try to trade for. Butler and Middleton.
Bruce Brown in Toronto could be a buyout candidate too.
Okay, he's still around. Yeah, that'd be an interesting pickup if they could get it. What about CP3 going to the Lakers in a potential trade?
Do you think that's
when the
true?
Spurs acquire De'Aaron Fox?
I don't know how that helps anyone.
I think it's more the logic that if the Spurs are able to get De'Aaron Fox, they don't really need Chris Paul.
And then you get a lot younger guy
Correct.
to match with Wemby.
Yep.
And they got a ton of picks, a ton of cap space, so they can absorb some contracts. I don't know why LA would want that. They would just get older than they already are.
Well, isn't it always for LeBron playing with his friends? Like he wants to play with CP3?
Well, yeah, if this is a multi-team trade, then who would the Lakers have to give up? Hachimura?
I have to look that up. No. Oh, I mean, he might be one of the candidates. You might be right. I mean, maybe Vanderbilt, team looking for defense or something. They do got some young guys that are somewhat promising, but it's kind of hard to tell sometimes the way they use them, how good they really are.
Like Dalton Connect? Think they'd give up their first rounder?
No, they really like him. He's been pretty good in spots, but he seems like the type of player that needs to get a good amount of minutes. And when they cut his minutes down, that's when his percentages go down. So I don't know. I don't know what they're doing with him. I feel like he should be in the rotation a little bit more than he is right now.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of things. I've heard that there's a 4-team trade that ends up with De'Aaron Fox and the Spurs. There's a 5-team trade that involves the Nets. I think Cam Johnson is another name that's been thrown out there for someone who can be moved around. But we have no idea. I don't know if they would try to close this before All-Star.
Well, I mean, you got to close it. The trade deadline's on the 6th.
Oh, I did not know that. So it's got to happen soon.
Yep, it's got to happen now.
I was just thinking about the fact that with All-Star, it might be weird if a player gets traded before the All-Star game, and who are they representing? If they got traded across the conference, what would happen? Would they still play for where they were selected?
I don't know. I guess. I mean, you'd have to. You can't. Well, aren't they doing the 3 squads, though?
Yeah. But the selections would have to remain the same, right?
I mean, I don't think it matters because aren't they getting selected? So they can be on any of the 3 squads. So I don't think it's really relevant in the situation the way the All-Star teams are now. Because they're drafting them, right? There's like 3 teams. Did you say like that Chuck and Shaq and Kenny were gonna like pick the teams? Yeah, so it doesn't matter. It's a draft, so trade changes nothing.
I wonder if there's precedent for this.
I mean, there's been players traded mid-game and they just sat them the rest of the game.
Technically, KD was traded to the Suns after he was already named an All-Star for the Nets in the East, but he had a sprained MCL, so it wasn't a factor. It happened in 2008 with Jason Kidd. He got traded from the Nets to the Mavs, but the teams waited until after the All-Star break to finalize the deal, so he represented the Nets in the All-Star game.
There you go.
The bottom post on this Reddit thread asking about this says, Adam Silver publicly executes them for their transgressions and then selects another player from a Lakers team that is fighting for the play-in. Because Adam Silver does pick the injury reserves.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's not a vote thing. He just picks them. I bet we're gonna have lots to talk about by the time the trade deadline rolls around. I'm surprised I didn't know that it was coming up so soon. Any more NBA
February
thoughts?
6th at 2 p.m. So all these trades should start happening within the next few days.
It's gonna be so crazy. There are some Spurs players that I will miss if they have to be added in a package, like Keldon Johnson. He works so hard. He has this motor.
Sometimes you got to let go of these players to get better, though. So can't get too attached.
Like when the Spurs were really terrible before Wemby came in, he was one of the players that was actually exciting. The way that he had this motor and how he would get up. So I'm already starting to mourn him because I have a feeling that he's going to have to go.
Or just follow him to his new team. Leave the Spurs.
Well, I don't know if I like him that much. All right, so it's been a couple of weeks since we've reached into the mailbag. We've had a lot of stuff going on, a lot of topics, and we don't want to make these podcast episodes too long for the folks who are listening. So we got another question. So as always, feel free to reach out to casadecavasospod@gmail.com or find us on social media if we are on social media. Or if you know us individually, you can DM us too. We can see if we can get that question or comment covered in a future episode. So our question for today is from Rudy in Harlingen, Texas, asking, when should you go to a private freestanding ER versus a hospital-affiliated freestanding ER versus a regular hospital ER?
This question comes up a lot in my real life.
Well, yeah, you're an ER doctor. Have you worked at all three of these types of establishments?
I have only worked at the private freestanding and the hospital, but I am familiar with people who have worked at the hospital freestandings, and so I do have familiarity with that situation too. So I think the best way to think about it is to ask you guys about a certain condition that you guys might be thinking about that might be a potential need to go to the ER.
What if I'm having like severe chest pains?
Severe chest pain, you should go to the hospital. And if possible, you should try to find out if that hospital has a cath lab. That's where they actually do the procedure to open up the blood vessel if you do have a heart attack. So ideally, a hospital and one that has a cath lab that isn't going to require you to be transferred.
You just want us to throw things at you that we would potentially
Yeah,
go to
I mean,
the ER
I
for.
could come up with some of my own too, but I think you guys can come up with some situations that you've wondered about.
Okay, broken penis.
Broken penis. Okay. That would be the hospital because you want to be at a hospital that has a urologist on call. If possible, maybe you could call ahead and see if they have a urologist on call. The thing about a private freestanding is we don't have anyone on call for us. So that's going to be a transfer to the hospital. And usually like a hospital freestanding also is not going to have a urologist that'll come by. They might have to transfer you to their main hospital.
So is it the same if you have an erection lasting longer than 4 hours?
If you have a priapism, which is an erection lasting more than 4 hours, then I also would recommend you go to a hospital that has a urologist on call. Technically, ER docs do have some things they can try first, but if those fail, you're going to have to be transferred to the urologist, and you really don't want to spend a lot of time with the priapism because that can damage your penis.
Wasn't it you who was talking about a urologist who said that they weren't a penis expert?
Yeah, I saw that somewhere online. And I'm like, what the heck? If you are at a hospital and call a urologist and they tell you that, I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with the medical system.
What if you had a fireworks accident? Like
Okay.
it went off in your hand.
And how much damage is there to the hand? Like, does it seem like there's pieces of the fingers that have come off?
Let's say yes.
That is a hospital. And also, it depends on where you live. You might have to be transferred regardless in South Texas. Like, depending on how bad it is, if it needs like significant plastic surgery, sometimes you have to be transferred to San Antonio. So I wouldn't say drive to San Antonio, but just note that even at a hospital, a full hospital in South Texas, you may have to be transferred anyway.
What was the injury that Grandpa drove himself for?
Okay.
He cut off his finger
Yeah, so that is a very
with a
interesting
circular saw.
situation. That is something that in South Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley, you're usually going to have to be transferred out to San Antonio. And I've been told by the accepting doctors in San Antonio that usually by the time the transfer happens, all the paperwork, the acceptance, the actual physical transfer, like being transported there, it's too late to save that digit. So I don't know what you do. I think if that happened to me, I would ask someone to drive me to San Antonio. I think if you lost a digit, I mean, it's very complicated because there's a special way you need to like preserve that digit. You need to keep it moist, but at the same time, not put it straight in ice.
Mm-hmm.
You need to kind of keep it from touching the ice itself. So it's kind of a hard situation. I hope it doesn't happen, but it would be best to get to San Antonio as quickly as possible. So yeah, so his injury was that he was doing some work and he sawed off like his whole thumb.
Ugh.
But because he lives in the San Antonio area, he went to a hospital freestanding, and they actually transported him pretty quickly to the main hospital where they had the plastic surgeon
Mm-hmm.
or ortho. I'm not sure what specialty it was exactly. And they were able to, within the time frame that's needed, put it back on, and it survived.
But he drove himself.
Yes.
So he did drive himself to the hospital freestanding. He stated that while he was driving, he felt that he was floating,
Oh my God.
like he was almost like losing consciousness. Then he walked out of his vehicle. He had his hand to his chest, like bleeding, like blood all over his hand and his chest. And they were like, "Sir, were you shot?"
Do you think we
Yeah.
could still laugh about this now if he didn't recover the thumb?
Maybe.
I feel like he would still laugh about it, so I'm going to say yes.
I will say that even though he had it reimplanted, it still doesn't work great. Like it's stiff,
Mhm.
and like even his nail looks weird. He feels like it's good that it was reimplanted, but it's still not fully functional.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like all our questions so far have been like pretty much get to the actual hospital ER. So when would you actually recommend going to a freestanding ER instead?
Okay, so there's also the difference between the hospital freestanding and the private freestanding. I think the private freestanding is going to be a situation where you don't suspect that you're going to need to be transferred, which is also hard for people to figure out, right? You know, if you're not a medical person.
Mm-hmm.
I think, for example, if you think you might have appendicitis, you probably should go to either the hospital freestanding or the hospital.
Well, how likely is the average person to know that they have appendicitis?
That's exactly the problem, right? People don't really know, and I don't expect them to know, right? I think if someone has a laceration, like a wound that needs to be sewn up,
Mhm.
I think that's perfect for the private freestanding. If someone thinks that they're having a kidney stone attack, I think that tends to be perfect for the private freestanding because a lot of those people end up having their pain controlled and they can go home. I do think that most abdominal pain, like if you're not really sure what it is probably appropriate for the private freestanding. If you're having like an asthma exacerbation, COPD exacerbation, that could also be appropriate for the private freestanding. So I think it's stuff that's urgent, emergent, but not to the point where you're thinking you're probably going to need to go have a surgery or be admitted to the hospital or have a procedure urgently.
So a heart attack would be iffy.
I don't recommend if you're having a heart attack or stroke or a possible heart attack or stroke to go straight to the freestanding. Of course, if you feel like, oh my God, I'm going to collapse, like I'm not going to be able to make it, sure, we could stabilize you, but it would be best for you to go to the hospital if you're having a possible heart attack or stroke.
So then for like a private freestanding, like acute injuries, minor discomfort
Yeah.
is where you should head.
Yeah. Like a
Yeah.
stitch by your eye
Like,
from a screwdriver wound.
speaking of head injuries, that's also a good thing to talk about because I think also most head injuries are also appropriate for a private freestanding ER. Like if you hit your head really hard and you're having a headache, nausea, concussion symptoms, then I think that's appropriate because most of the time you get a CT and it's negative. And if you end up having a little bit of a head bleed, that's usually not something where you have to go to the hospital emergently. And so it would not be the worst thing to wait for a transfer if you do have a head bleed.
Yeah. What does neurocritical care and neurosurgery look like in the Valley?
I think we're actually pretty well staffed on that.
Hmm.
We got neurosurgery, we've got neurointerventional. So I think that's actually one of the services that we're pretty strong on. I think cardiology is pretty strong as well.
Especially if you have poor health outcomes from being in a region with the largest percentage of obese people like McAllen. I imagine that things like heart health need to have more interventions.
Well, and I think the fact that we have a lot of those conditions, a lot of heart attacks and strokes, has made the doctors come. And so that's helpful. The problem is, like, for example, a digit that is cut off, you just don't have a lot of those cases in general. So it's not really going to be worth necessarily having a doctor who specializes in that here. So usually you're going to need to be in a big city to have the potential to have a digit reimplanted.
Yeah, what about like gunshot or stab wounds?
I mean, that's basic trauma. So a trauma surgeon can handle that. A general surgeon really can handle that. You might need cardiothoracic surgery, which we have.
At the private freestanding?
So I guess I was answering in general in the Valley. But as far as a private freestanding, you're not going to have a surgeon on call. If you feel like you're about to die, of course, you could go there if, like, that's the closest place, so we can try to stabilize you. But for example, the private freestanding that I'm at, we don't have blood products.
It's perfect for Jehovah's Witnesses.
So if you're able to, after a gunshot wound or a stabbing, make it to the hospital, that'd be best. But we could technically stabilize you to the best of our ability at the private freestanding. But like I said, no blood products. We'd be able to give you IV fluids. We'd be able to intubate you if needed. But we can't do a lot.
What about for like a compound fracture?
I think fractures in general can be initially evaluated in the private freestanding. A lot of these fractures, they're not emergent as far as the need to have something done. So if you think you fractured something, for the most part, I think you can go to the private freestanding or a hospital freestanding.
Well, I mean, if you have a compound fracture, I imagine you know that you fractured something.
Yeah.
It's like, this bone is sticking out of my skin. I wonder if I broke it.
Well, so you're asking about an open fracture.
Yes.
An open fracture, though, too, you could still be initially evaluated in the private freestanding, but you are going to have to be transferred. Like, there's no way around it.
Like, surgery will be required.
You're going to need a washout. If you have a real severe emergency, you should be going to the hospital. But I do understand that a lot of people have noted that the hospital ERs are super overwhelmed. They may have to wait there a long time. They're also worried about the care because there's a lot of understaffing going on.
Yeah.
And I just had this conversation yesterday at work. A lot of the good people don't want to work there anymore. Like, it's not worth it. You just get extremely overworked. It's like, what's the point? If you can do other jobs where you're not getting pulverized as far as your body and mind. It's also like high liability when you don't have proper staffing.
That kind of trend I've heard has been making the rounds when it comes to students choosing their specialty out of medical school. People are desperate for emergency medicine residents now because people know that the work-life balance and the conditions are usually pretty horrible, especially when starting off, when you're going to be forced to work in that hospital setting where you're going to be understaffed, overworked.
Yeah, so when I was going for residency, it was a fairly competitive specialty.
I wonder how much of that is because shows like ER were still on TV.
Could have been that. And I think when I was in med school, it was very much considered a possible lifestyle residency because you could have a lot of days off. You may only have to work like 12 shifts a month, and then you're off the rest of the days. But then later, when you're older, you learn, well, yeah, that's still not great because I'm off on a lot of days when I'm really tired from the overnight shifts or just like the crazy hardworking hours that I did and all the charts I have to do too. Sometimes I was doing charts on my days off too. So actually recently it became an uncompetitive specialty. Like they had a hard time matching.
How recently?
I think it was like 2 years ago or so that it was quite a surprise. Like you went from this competitive specialty where you didn't really have unmatched spots. Now you have all these unmatched spots and you're having to fill a lot of spots with international medical graduates.
I have one more list of symptoms for you.
Okay. Is it going to be weird? Is it going to be something about your penis or something?
No.
I feel like it's going to be like, go straight to the hospital.
Yeah. No, not my penis. This is a hypothetical person's penis.
Oh, this is a friend of a friend.
Yeah, that's what I always hear that. It's for a friend.
Okay,
Which
so
we now know this is about Justin.
So what if you have just like random bouts of sweating, possibly a rapid increase in blood pressure, leg weakness when you've been working out. Where should I go?
Is this like a person that we told you about?
No comment.
I mean, I think if it's something that's been going on for weeks, I think you could go to an urgent care or the private freestanding. I don't think you need to go to a hospital for that. Unless acutely you start to feel horrible, like, oh my God, this is getting a lot worse. Like my chest is feeling weird. I'm feeling short of breath. I'm feeling weak. But I think you could definitely be evaluated initially in an urgent care or a private freestanding ER.
Okay. Well, Rudy, has that question been answered enough for you? Did you get what you wanted?
He's not here in the podcast, though.
Yeah, but I'm speaking to him directly if he's still listening.
Okay.
He'll have to send us a follow-up message to just confirm yay or nay.
He'll have a follow-up question.
I mean, I could go by like body system if you wanted to real quick. All right. Headache. So if your headache is not associated with any weakness, numbness, or tingling of one side of your body or double vision or something like that, then you can go to the private freestanding ER. If your neck hurts and you don't have weakness, numbness, tingling one side of your body, then that's appropriate for private freestanding ER. If you have a chest pain, but it's not a severe chest pain and it feels like maybe it's from a cough or it's worse with deep breaths, then I think you could do private freestanding ER. If you have abdominal pain and it's not like you think you probably have appendicitis and it's not extremely severe, then I think a private freestanding can evaluate that. If you can't urinate or if you're having burning with urination, you could go to a private freestanding ER. If you have female issues like bleeding, discharge, and you're not pregnant, then that's appropriate for a private freestanding ER. If you have an abscess, which is a collection of pus under the skin, that's appropriate for a private freestanding ER. And I would say, like most fractures, I think if you think something's fractured, you can definitely start off at the private freestanding ER. And I would say most lacerations too, most wounds also would be appropriate.
What if you scorched your eyeballs from looking at some UV lights without the proper eye protection?
I think that's appropriate because that's like almost an urgent care complaint. So I think that's appropriate for private freestanding. And I will say that for some reason, the ophthalmologists are actually very accessible to us. There's this practice here in the Valley where they answer our calls even though they don't have to. And they're very willing to see the patient like first thing in the morning. So I think that's appropriate.
That's so different from how I hear specialists usually interact, like cardiology and gastro, where they're like,
yeah,
this is not our problem. Why'd you call us?
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're called Gulf Coast Eye. They are awesome. They did not sponsor us. I just want to say that they are so helpful and they've answered my calls and they've been willing to see people the very next morning for us.
Basically, if you don't think you're going to die, it sounds like you'd potentially go to the private freestanding, is what I'm gathering here.
But at the same time, I do understand that if you feel like you're about to pass out, and that's the closest place, then yeah, go in there and we can try to stabilize you. I mean, because we can intubate, we can do CPR, we can do like cardioversion or defibrillation, things like that.
So use your best judgment. See if you can make it to the ER, get there.
Yeah, and always, if you're stable enough, if you don't feel like you're about to pass out, you could call and say, hey, like, should I go to the private freestanding or do you think I should go to the hospital? And we do answer those questions.
So basically with a hospital-affiliated freestanding, you basically got to treat it like a private freestanding in terms of the things you would go for?
To some extent, but it's easier to be transferred because you're basically a satellite for the hospital.
Yeah.
So at least you're going to have doctors who are on call for you. And so that'll help out.
So if you get transferred from like the private ER, are they going to want to evaluate you at their own ER again?
It depends. Because sometimes we do have to send them as an ER to ER transfer, but sometimes the specialist or the admitting doctor is willing to take the patient with our evaluation.
Good to know. It's all very helpful. I don't know if I've seen very many freestanding ERs in Chicago, but there's just so many hospitals here that it's kind of easy to find one. But even like hearing about how some of the hospitals are not really trauma centers for their ER. So like if there's something that's really bad that say happens at Rush, sure it'll take you, but chances are you'll get transferred to somewhere like
Yeah.
Cook County as a trauma center. Cook County is the hospital that ER was supposed to have taken place in
I interviewed there.
because of ER.
I don't think that's why I applied. I was looking at Chicago in general. But yeah, they were interested in taking me as a resident. So I wonder if I would have matched there if I would have ranked them high. But I do want to note, too, that reminded me that the private freestandings, I think, are unique to Texas because in other states, the laws have not allowed that to happen. So, for example, in Virginia, where my friend works, it's technically not a freestanding ER that she works in. It's like a advanced urgent care.
Huh.
But when she describes it, it kind of sounds like she can do as much as we can.
So then what's the distinction? Is it just the name?
I feel like it's billing. I feel like you want to be an ER. You want to be a private freestanding ER so you can bill like an ER and get bigger charges. It's all about the Benjamins.
In this country, at least.
Yep.
Well, I think that's a wrap for this show. Keep on sending stuff over to that mailbag. We love answering your questions. Plus, it means that we don't have to like scrounge around for topics that we don't know anything about. Continue following us if you haven't already. Like, subscribe, tell your friends about it. Rate it 5 stars. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts at. And we will see you later. Is anyone else going to sign off? What the hell?
Until next time, guys.
I think I'm going to leave that in.